So my name is Stanford Prescott. I am the Director of Projects at Sanford Neighborhood Leadership. We're a local nonprofit based in Central Phoenix. I'm also a governing board member with the Phoenix Union High School District. I want to talk about what a campaign could look like, what a successful campaign could look like. But just so you know, you're actually, I know that it hasn't succeeded before now, the Apache Junction District override, but you guys are actually in a very good starting spot if this is how many people come to a meeting and it hasn't even officially been put on the ballot yet. I have been in meetings where it is literally the superintendent and 4 principals, and that is the start, right? It's very limited to the district, very limited to an insider group with few community ties, whereas here we're actually starting from a broad base, everywhere from students, teachers, parents, elected officials. This is a good group to start with. So a little bit about what I've worked on. So at Sanford Neighborhood Leadership, we worked on 6 overrides. All of them had failed before we worked on them, and when we worked on them, they all passed. And they were in 4 districts: Phoenix Union, Falls, Creighton, and Roosevelt, and altogether they're equal to about $42 million for those 4 school districts. And again, they had all failed before we worked on them. It's totally possible to work on these campaigns and bring a level of professionalism. In a lot of cases, what happens is that the professional campaign techniques that are used at the higher levels of politics don't always make their way down into the override races because they're smaller, which means that although there's a lot of hard work put in, I know Cindy told me about all the door knocks and phone calls that were done last year, it doesn't actually have the effect that you need. And so some of those campaign techniques can tweak it. And that's part of what we bring, is that campaign strategy and expertise. Our senior staff altogether has about 28 years of campaign experience. But I think the other big thing is, again, I'm from Phoenix. I'm from South Phoenix. I know and love my community very well. I do not necessarily know Apache Junction that well. You guys know and love Apache Junction very well, and Gold Canyon. And so the question is what we want to do is not just come in here and give a strategy, but actually train you guys to empower local leaders to solve issues here. Because you guys have the local connections, the local know-how, to actually take some of these skills and best practices and apply them to make a difference more. This is important not just because for this one override to make it work, but going into the future. Because there will be other campaigns you'll want to work on related to the school district, and this will help give you that information in case there's another override, in case there's something else, I don't know what, but you'll actually have a lot of these techniques and skills learned yourself so you can make a big difference. So the first thing to know is that likely voters are a very small, very finicky group of people. I believe there's about 40 to 50,000 people in the district as a whole. Is that correct? So out of those 40 to 50,000, the amount that would vote on an off-year November 2015 election is about 6,200. So you're already talking at a very small group of people. And of those 6,200, just to give you some perspective, in case you're wondering how I got these numbers, so I used something called the VAN. It's a voter file, which takes the government records of how people have voted in the past, not necessarily what they voted yes or no on or which candidate, but just did they vote in an election, and we're using that to make our best guess using some money. So there's about 6,170 voters in the district. They live at 4,288 houses, right? Because some, families vote together, the husband and the wife, or other arrangements. So, and then we have, of those, 1,825 are Democrat, 2,796 are Republican, and 1,529 are independent. So what this means is that in the district, we're already working from a disadvantage because, again, not all Republicans are necessarily no voters on override, but they tend to be no voters on override. So you're already working on an uphill battle. The second part that also makes this an uphill battle is you have, so of people who are under 50, there are only 500, or there are only 478 people who are 18 to 49. So that means college-age students, recent high school graduates, people who have kids in the schools. A lot of them don't vote. And so the remainder of that 6,170 is over 50. That's actually about 5,600 or so. And so this informs our campaign strategy in a couple ways. One of the things I know last year was a big outreach effort was parents. Parents are great, we should outreach to parents. However, parents by definition are maybe 10% of the total electorate, which means we have to, actually when we're talking about the campaign, we're talking about how do we outreach to grandparents, how do we outreach to people that do not have any kids in the schools, how do we actually extend that reach to more types of voters. Campaign strategy, so basic thing to understand is, so we can put all voters into a box. So the x-axis here is actually support. So on the left side, we have people who are definite yes votes. And on the right side, we have people who are definite no votes. On this side, we have turnout, how likely they are to actually vote. Again, we have people who are 100% likely to vote. They vote in every election, rain or shine. If the postman brings it late, they go to the post office and hunt down their ballot. And we have 0%. People who will never, ever, ever vote. You can come to their house, you can talk to them multiple times, and they will never vote. So the people who are yes and are that 100% are actually our base. People who are no and are that 100% are the opposition. Now the thing is when you're actually taking a look at these numbers, one of the things that's easy to see is that if you look at people who would naturally vote yes on an override, on a tax increase to fund schools, the opposition actually starts as a larger square than the base. Does that make sense? So what our job is to do as a campaign is not only lock down that base, remind them that this is a thing, explain it to them, and so that we lock in their vote, but it's to add to that base. There are two ways. One is persuasion. So there are some people who are going to vote who haven't made up their mind yet, or would vote no, but if we came and had a really good conversation with them, they would vote yes. So it's actually going out there and having that persuasion conversation. The second is expansion. So there are a number of people who might not vote, but totally love their schools and would vote yes if only they voted. Perfect example, recent high school graduates. Would totally vote yes to make sure their school is better because there's a good chance their brother or their sister or their friend's still there. Very bad at voting by themselves. And so, our campaign though, once we take that base and we add in the expansion and the persuasion, we actually have a larger group of voters in the opposition. But to make it there, we have to have a successful campaign that can outreach to the expansion, can outreach to the persuasion, and get that done. Does that make sense? So a lot of the work done for persuasion is what we call communications. Again, we know they're going to vote. It's how they're going to vote. The more information they have, the better decisions they can make. And so it's about getting information to them through ads, mail, phone calls, pieces of literature left at their door. All those things help them make better decisions. The expansion, the people who would support us but don't always vote, they need what's called field. They need people to go to their door, have a conversation with them, and talk to them about why it's important to vote. Just like anything else, right, in life. So if you get a random email from a stranger, how likely are you to delete it? Fairly likely, yeah. I deleted like 5 while I was waiting for the presentation to start. So, but if someone comes up to you, introduces themselves, goes to shake your hand, you're not going to just, most people would actually give them a minute at least to explain where they're coming from. Does that make sense? And so, for these expansion voters, where we're actually making a bigger ask of them to vote rather than how to vote, we need to make sure that we're having those face-to-face conversations, those phone call conversations. We're still going to send them the mail and everything like that because it still helps support it, but they need those conversations to help make sure they make it to the polls. So the 3 parts of this campaign that we want to do some training around and help you guys build a quality strategy for our field. So the part we just talked about, the grassroots outreach, the door knocks, the phone calls, the communications, the mail, the ads in the newspaper, the signs, and last but not least, to make sure that we can afford all of those to the finance. So we need to have a real fundraising component that can get some dollars into the campaign so we can spend. The unfortunate nature of American politics today is that to have a successful campaign, you need a well-funded campaign, which is what it is, but we do need to go ahead and pay for those two things. Part of what we want to do is field is effective. The trouble is doing enough field to make a dent, right? At the end of the day, this is all a numbers game. So what we want to do is make sure we have a very thorough, comprehensive push through all of our voters. So again, we have about 4,000 households. Of these, once we remove that opposition and add in that expansion, we have about 5,000 people at 4,000 households that would make reasonably good targets in what we call the universe. So people that we want to talk to because we think that they're in one of these 3 categories that might vote for us. So for the field, we want to do a couple things. We want to do 2 passes of canvassing before ballots arrive, so in October, and then 1 pass as something called GOTV, get out the vote, canvassing between October and November. When I say passes, I pass through that 4,000 universe. So altogether, we're talking about 12,000 doors being knocked on and conversations being had. The second thing we want to layer on is what we call a lit drop. So that's taking and I should have brought the example I had at the office, but taking a piece of literature, a flyer, and leaving it at someone's home. What we've done in several of the past campaigns I've worked on, and I can pull up an example here on my computer if anybody wants to look at one after the meeting, but what we've done is we've made newspaper style pieces of literature, so it looks like a newspaper, the Phoenix Union Times or New Roosevelt Times, Creighton Gazette, and actually had articles in there that talked about the different aspects of the campaign. Because not every voter wants to read a whole lot about the campaign, but there are definitely some voters who want to read a whole lot about the campaign, and so this gives them all the information. The other thing is, because of its distinctive appearance, it looks like a newspaper, it's different. People will actually spend more time looking at it before throwing it into the trash. So, a lit drop, go ahead and make another pass through. We do some calls. So 1 pass before GOTV, and then 1 pass during GOTV. Although we would have some volunteer calls, these calls would actually be, there's some private contractors that do these calls for all sorts of political campaigns. They're the professional telemarketers, and this is what they do. We used them on all for those previous override campaigns. And so the campaign would contract with them, they'd send out a whole bunch of calls, and then they'd send us back the list, who said yes, who said no. And when they say no, we can actually take them off the list, and we don't have to call them or knock on their door again. And then, last but not least, well, actually not last but not least, but then also do layering, and just to clarify, those calls I was just talking about are real live people. So then we do 2 rounds of robocalls over the top. These would be closer to GOTV. Robocalls have limited effectiveness. I know personally there's this one that keeps trying to get me to sign up for a cruise ship, and I hang up every time. It goes brr. But they are cheap. It's only 3 cents per person you want to call. And so you can make a pass through. And when you target your supporters, people who have already said, yes, I want to support this, it's actually most effective then because they listen to the whole thing, they go out and vote. And so it's basically an easy reminder for these people, the expansion voters. And then last but not least, we have community outreach. This is some of the more traditional grassroots. So going to HOA meetings, going to PTA meetings, churches, various other types of meetings and family events where we can actually talk to people, present about this, talk to leaders in the community, and get some of this information out there outside of the normal political methods. And so at the end of this, ideally, everyone, now not everyone's going to answer the door, not everyone's going to answer the phone, but everyone in our target universe, this base persuasion expansion, by November election day, will have gotten 2 people knocking on their, well actually 3 people knocking on their door. They will have gotten a newspaper dropped at their door, 2 people who are real live people calling them, 2 robocalls to their door, and they may have seen someone at their church, at their HOA meeting, at the PTA meeting. So they will have had plenty of time to get information and plenty of input. Does that make sense? And with all of that layering, that actually helps push them out. So the other big part of it is communications. So there is a few things in here. One is direct mail. So just sending out some political mail, postcards. We want to send out 8 pieces, which is a lot. But frankly, because we're working on an uphill battle, it's how many are needed. For each of those campaigns that we worked on, they sent out at least 4 pieces, just so you know. When you send out multiple impressions, you have to send out multiple pieces of mail, multiple ads, multiple of the field, so that you can actually change someone's mind. And so that's why we're sending out so many, is it keeps that constant reminder. Does that make sense? So the other thing we want to do is some of the more obvious things, so traditional media. I know that we've had a lot of support from some of the local newspapers. So running ads in those, that when people read through the local newspapers, they can read about the campaign, what it stands for. Social media online. Social media doesn't move that many votes, but it can help reinforce your supporters and make sure they vote. Signs, they're annoying, but you have to do them. And then last but not least are pro statements. So before election day, they always send out that little booklet, the voter guide. They have them at the county buildings and whatnot. So the voter guide, you can actually put in pro statements from various people, parents, business people, school people, that talk about why they support the override. And so you can actually get free advertising by sending that to everyone in the district and just submitting those pro statements ahead of time. Again, not every voter reads it. In fact, the vast majority of voters will not read it, but some will, and that does make a big difference. So last but not least is fundraising. So to go ahead and pay for all of this, it's going to cost $47,000, which is not impossible. So of those districts that I mentioned earlier that we worked on, so Balts, which is a very small school district, it has 3 elementary schools, raised $20,000, Creighton raised $27,000, Roosevelt raised $40,000, and Phoenix Union was actually around $200,000. It is, now again, Phoenix Union is a much larger district than Apache Junction, but it is entirely possible to get to this number. It's a little high, but I think that we have some advantages on our side from urgency. So your typical people that actually donate to override campaigns are school businesses. So there's a lot of people that do business with the schools. So the people who sell pens, right, or sell pencils, and they need to make sure that the school is functioning so that they have someone to sell pencils to, they always donate to override campaigns. Last campaign, to the best of my knowledge, no one actually, not a single one donated. And so that's your first easy source to get that money. Because all of those places where it's listing 20,000, 40,000, almost all 90% or more came from that. The second place is local businesses. So my understanding is that a lot of the local businesses are worried about the effect that the school closings are having on the economy, especially the realtors, because people are moving out. There's a lot of opportunity to reach out to local business people to actually contribute. The other part of this is political groups. So, did you know there is a group in Phoenix whose entire job it is to donate money to override campaigns? That is all they do. They raise money and then they donate to override campaigns. They actually donated about $2,000 to each one of those campaigns I just listed. That is an easy spot to go for some money. And then last but not least is new independent donors. So there are folks in our community who have some extra cash, individuals, and actually getting them to put in there, not as our main source of income, but as a supplemental. I think one of the problems in the earlier overrides, at least the one that I looked at last year, is that it was entirely financed by teachers, right? All the sales were selling t-shirts to teachers, taking a small profit off of that and putting it into the campaign, which is great, right? It was a lot of hard work and the teachers made a big sacrifice in doing it, but it doesn't actually add up to that whole much, and it's a lot of burden to put on to our teachers who are already overworked and underpaid. And so what we want to shoot for that finance is actually looking for ways we can break out of the existing fundraising that was done before and look at new ways to fundraise. There's a lot of money out there, and it just takes knowing where to look to actually go after it and get it, and how to look for it. So campaign calendar. So I divided this up into 3 phases. So phase 1, so now May to July, this is the time to get some of our campaign details locked down, do some planning, finish putting all the details on this, because although I really like my sheet of butcher paper on the wall, it should be more detailed than that. The second part of that is doing training. So again, coming back to this, I don't know people in Apache Junction as well as you do. You know your neighbors and your friends a lot better than I do. And so providing you guys the training so that you know how to do things like knock on doors, or recruit volunteers to knock on doors, or run an event to knock on doors, or how to call a business and ask for money. Those kinds of trainings, providing them to you so that you guys are actually empowered to lead the campaign yourself. And so that's focused of May through July. We'll also start doing some of those things, start knocking on doors, start calling people for money. But the main part of it is making sure that we have the capacity here to carry us through the end of the year. So then the second phase is actually August to early October. So if you vote in here, raise your hand if you get your ballot in the mail. So most people who vote regularly get their ballot in the mail. Ballots arrive about a month ahead of time. The truth is that in modern elections in Arizona, that means that election day is not in November. The election is already over mid-October. There have been so many votes cast that there's no possible way that the election can change. So we actually, during this period leading into early October, because they'll begin arriving on homes, I believe it's the 10th or the 14th, I'm not sure the exact date, but right in there, we can double check the county website. But actually going out to people so that by the time they get their mail-in ballot, they've already had people knock on their door, they've already had phone calls, they've already had mail arrive at their home. And so they can already make an informed decision by the time they get their ballot. And then last but not least is get out the vote. And that's October to November. So it's a month where we double down, we go through, make another pass, because there are some people, a lot of people mail in their ballots, but there will be some that hold on to them. And so reminding them to send them in. Again, this is also very important with that expansion category. If we're talking about younger folks or other people that don't vote as often but would vote yes, they're gonna need an extra reminder. They may not know how to fill out the ballot. They don't know how to seal it up and sign it and everything. And so going to their homes and making sure to remind them so that we can get them out to vote. And then we actually turn them into voters so that by the time we get to election night, they're counted. Does that make sense?